I'm joined today by someone who has worked firsthand to make it possible for anyone, regardless of their background, to run for office. I will be talking with Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, who has represented Illinois' 17th Congressional since 2013. Representative Bustos is the only member of senior Democratic House leadership from the Midwest. She also serves on the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, the House Agriculture Committee, and the House Appropriations Committee. She has never lost an election in her life and has worked to make sure other candidates win elections through her partnership with Build the Bench. Build the Bench is a candidate training program that prepares people with a passion for public service for the difficult process of a campaign. Thank you, Representative Bustos, for joining us today.
Thank you, Sylvia. I appreciate being with you.
We're glad to have you here. So let's go ahead and get started. Although I can't speak for everyone listening to this episode, I have never run for office in government. Can you share with our audience what that process is like, what potential barriers people might face, and what some common misconceptions are about that process?
Sure. No, I'd be happy to do that. It's one of my favorite things to talk about because I have spent a good part of my political career recruiting people to run and actually starting my own program to train people to run and to be successful at that. I think if there's one overall message, it would be you don't have to fit a certain mold in order to run for office. If you look at members of Congress, sure, we have a lot of lawyers that serve in Congress, but my own professional background, I was a journalist for 17 years. I worked in healthcare after that, served on a city council before coming here. We have many of our newer and younger members who had never served in office at all. They were, in some cases, just very active in their communities and maybe got excited about a certain issue or became upset with, it might have been a local issue and wanted to do something about it. But I would say if there's a common denominator, it is just that you have a desire to make a difference. Now, the people who run and are most successful are the ones who have that fire in their belly. And I can tell you my own story as to why I ran if you want to get into that. But that fire in the belly, like to really want this and really have this deep desire to make a difference is really, really important. And then the Speaker of the House always says, politics is not for the faint of heart. And, it's a tough line of work. I think that's the other thing. When I get in front of a group of younger people, I have this letter that I write to them with some tips about how they can be successful in whatever they do as they go ahead in their careers or in their lives. One of which is don't take things personally. And the reason I'm pulling that out of all these 5 pieces of advice is because in politics, if you're going to take every tweet that is out there about you and take that personally, or every comment that's made about you, especially if you're a woman running for office or a woman of color running for office, because it can get more and more brutal depending on who you are. But if you take all that stuff personally, you're gonna end up in a corner, curled up and crying every day. You've really got to understand that in politics, people are going to say things about you, but it's more about them than it is about you. If you know your why, and when I say your why are you running? Why do you want to do this? And if that's based in wanting to make a difference for your community, for families, and it's for the right reason, then all that other stuff, as long as you're honest and ethical and work hard, you just got to get that out of your mind and move forward. But look, I think public service is the way to change the world. I think being in elected office is one of the primary ways you can change the world. And it's why I've really committed so much of my professional career to recruiting candidates to run and then helping them be successful once they've decided to run.
Right. And it's so inspiring to hear you say that because, like you said, having that fire in your gut that makes you want to run for office, that should be the driving force between who is winning elections and who is not winning elections. Yet there's still all these barriers that people face that make it much harder to run in the first place. And so I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit more about what those barriers might be and maybe some misconceptions that people have about running for office and the ease of it?
Well, I want to make sure that the barriers that are real, that we do something to diminish those. And that is why I started my Build the Bench program. That does not cost participants 1 cent, because I raise all the money for that program. And the reason I wanted it to be free is because I didn't want somebody who has this deep desire to be involved and run for office and make a difference. I didn't want it to be a barrier to them if they couldn't afford to, say, travel to someplace for a candidate training program, or whether they couldn't afford if there was a fee associated with the materials, or spending the night someplace, all of that. So we make it 100% free. And that is, ours is a boot camp. We do ours as a boot camp. So it's an all day commitment of an entire day. We provide all the speakers and take care of all that. We provide all the materials, and, a breakfast, a lunch, and all of that. And if somebody would struggle with, when we're doing these in person, it obviously depends on if it's during COVID or not during COVID. If somebody needed help with travel expenses, et cetera, again, I don't want money to get in the way of that. Another thing, Sylvia, is sometimes you have, for instance, young mothers who maybe they're young single mothers. And so there are now political action committees that if you are running at a certain level, you can go after some money to help pay for those costs. You can actually raise money legally now and help pay for some of those costs of, say, childcare. But those are a couple of the barriers. But I would say kind of the more of the ones that are more emotional are, and I can speak to this from a very personal level. When I made a decision, when I was thinking about running for Congress, this was before I made the final decision, but when I was thinking about it, I thought, wow, this is really complex. You think about all of the issues that members of Congress debate and vote on. And it's everything from, right now, we're debating a multi-trillion-dollar package that includes everything from universal pre-K to extending public education to grades 13 and 14, to what can we do for family paid leave? What can we do for debt for college kids? What can we do for to help with childcare? Just and then look at like other issues, pulling out of Afghanistan. I'm getting a classified briefing later this week about what happened in Afghanistan. So when you think about the complex issues, and when I was thinking about running, I remember going to my dad, who has since passed away, but I was very close to. And this is not something that I would have expressed publicly at the time. And even saying this to you now is something I don't talk a whole lot about. But I said to my dad, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage all these really, really complicated issues and keeping track of all of that. And what my dad said to me, he had been a chief of staff to a US senator and had worked in public service, always behind the scenes. But what he said to me, he said, you are smarter than most people in Washington, D.C. And you will be able to handle this. Now, I'm pretty lucky because I had a father who was loving and who understood the importance of self-confidence. And he just didn't want that thought to get in the way of me running. And so my advice to people when they have those self-doubts is, you can do this. It takes hard work. You got to study. You have to prepare. But, women are kind of known for studying and preparing and going into situations and making sure that we're ready. But so that would be another one, so the money, and then you got to raise money. And so a lot of people are thinking, well, how am I going to raise these millions of dollars it takes to run for Congress? And for whatever reason, and I can't really even tell you why, I knew I could do it. And I don't come from money. My mom was a preschool teacher. I told you my dad worked behind the scenes, and he was a newspaper reporter when we were young. And, he until later in life, he didn't make much money. So we didn't come from money. But for whatever reason, I live by this mantra: if you don't ask, you don't get. And so, calling friends and people who I knew believed in me, I got pretty good at being able to say, hey, I hope you'll invest in my campaign and help me be the first woman ever elected to this congressional district, and help me work really hard to get health care for people who need it. And, the issues that were really, really important to me. And but that can also be a barrier, that fear of having to ask for money, but you can get good at that as well. So, I mean, those are just three examples that I can think of off the top of my head.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring up money, and it brings me to my next question, because according to 538, in House elections over the last 2 decades, 90% of the elections were won by the candidate with the most money. And in the Senate, that number hovers closer to 80%. This means that in general, the candidate who spends the most wins. And like you're saying, it is sometimes a sign of support. But one of my questions is, why does money play such a huge role in campaigns?
It is something that we need to fix. And we can do that through legislation. I am a co-sponsor of actually 2 pieces of legislation in the House, one of which has already passed the House and is sitting, like so many pieces of legislation, sitting on the Senate side, because it would have to get 60 votes on the Senate to do right by campaign finance reform. But first of all, there should be no such thing as what's called dark money, where you can have businesses or individuals give money and nobody knows where it's coming from. That should go away. The Citizens United ruling out of the U.S. Supreme Court that says corporations, they're people, so to speak, that they can give just like a human being could give. That has done a ton of damage to our democracy, and we need to undo that as well. The second piece of legislation is Adam Schiff, he's a member of Congress from California. He's the chair of the Intelligence Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was one of the leaders on the impeachment trial, but he's got a piece of legislation that also takes a look at the executive branch. For instance, we had a guy who was president of the United States who kept saying, we're going to be able to see his tax returns, and never displayed them. And so, to know what the conflicts of interest were from a business perspective, he never released that. So this piece of legislation would require anybody running for president to release their taxes. I think it was 10 years worth of taxes. If they have conflicts of interest, those have to be declared. And it's just, I would say it's more of a really shining a light on who's running for office and making sure that they're doing it for the right reasons, because they want to do right by our country rather than they want to do right by their business or their family. And so we desperately need campaign finance reform. It is something that really can be corrupting. And certainly there should be, we ought to know every cent that is given to every candidate running for any office. None of it should be secret. And there should be limits on how much can be given as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I absolutely agree. I think it's more than past time for campaign finance reform. And this does help bring me to my next question, which is, when it's easiest for the wealthy to run for office, what effect does that have on representation in our government?
Well, again, the reason I don't charge anybody to go through my training program is because I don't want anybody's net worth to get in the way of them running for office. Now, let me give you a story that also is very personal. I was looking really kind of initially in an informal way of running for a statewide office at one point. And we took a look at the race and whether it would make sense for me to run. And in this race were 2 other very wealthy people, very, very wealthy people. And again, as I told you, I don't come from wealth. I'm married to the sheriff of our county. And, we're just kind of normal, everyday working people. And when we were looking at this race and realized that two of the major candidates were beyond wealthy. I mean, just very, very wealthy. We made this determination that I was going to have to do nothing but raise money in order to be able to get out my messaging, to explain to people who I am before the other folks would have enough money to try to define me in a negative way. All right. So with wealth comes an ability to spend all kinds of money on advertisement and being able to get your messaging out in a way that a person who doesn't have a whole lot of money has to sit there and raise the money, maybe $100 at a time or $27 at a time. I think at one point, my average donation to my campaign was $27. And so you think about how many phone calls and how much networking it takes to get millions of dollars from an average donation of $27. All right. So what ends up happening is those with money, they don't have to do all of that. And so they can define their opponents in a, if they want, in a negative way, and they're able to prop up themselves. And again, I mean, there can be all kinds of negative consequences of that. So we need people who are, spent their lives being school teachers. We have a member of Congress from the state of Connecticut who was the National Teacher of the Year. She had never run for anything in her life before. So, but she was elected to Congress. And we need people like that because she can talk from a classroom perspective about what we need to do with public education. And in my case, being a journalist and then working in healthcare for a decade of my life, I can talk about healthcare not only from a deeply personal perspective, but also from an institutional perspective of having worked in healthcare. So I think the best thing that we can do as far as electing people is have a good cross section of people. I'm a firm believer that the more diverse the people sitting around the table are, the better your decisions are going to be, because you're coming from all different places. And when I talk about diversity, I talk about it in a lot of different ways: occupational diversity, geographic diversity, ethnic, racial, gender, all of that. To me, that is how you get to the best decision. And so I define diversity very, very broadly. And believe me, you don't want everybody sitting around that table being multimillionaires, because it is a very different place that you come from and that you go home to if you're a multimillionaire versus somebody who's been a school teacher her entire career and who's married to a police officer. I mean, that's a very different place to come from. And I think that's very important. And again, so people thinking about running, we want you. We want you to like, wherever you're coming from, you're going to bring those unique perspectives to whether it's the city council or the county board or the library board or Congress. And we need that to make the best decisions possible.
Right. And, if only people from wealthy backgrounds are sitting at that table that you mentioned, some issues and ideas might not even be discussed in the first place that affect many Americans. So it is really important to have that diversity as well. Although our current Congress is the most diverse it ever has been in history, as you're saying, there's still a long way to go before it's truly representative of America. Only 23% of lawmakers are non-white by ethnicity and race, and only just over a quarter of Congress members are women. How do we work towards making Congress and all levels of government representative of everyone in the country?
Well, I think it is a matter of making sure that, first of all, that people can see themselves, right? So Hollywood can even play a role in this. And I think they're doing a much better job today than they did, say, 10 years ago, of making sure that when somebody's watching a successful family, that if you're Black or you're brown or you're LGBTQ or whatever your background is, that you can see yourself in successful families or successful jobs or successful offices, that sort of thing. I think that's important. I do think Hollywood's done a better job on that. We as Democrats, we have our caucus. So just on the Democratic side, we are a majority minority caucus. meaning we have more women, we have more people of color, we have more LGBTQ members than we do of, just white males. And so we're proud of that. So when somebody out there looks at our caucus, they can see themselves. We have, first generation immigrants who are members of Congress now. And, even first generation immigrants can see themselves in our caucus. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is the training program that I call Build the Bench is I built this from scratch after I was helped run recruiting nationwide back several election cycles ago. And we left that election cycle, and that would have been in 2014. And it was very clear to me that we needed to work very hard to get more young people, more women, and people of color to run at the congressional level. Again, this was back to 2014, and we have done a lot better since then. But that's why I started Build the Bench, is because I wanted to be able to recruit more people and help them. Like maybe these are people who start out running for city council or county board or library board or community college board. But that gives you the foundation then. And then you can maybe run for mayor after that. And then after that, you can run for Congress. And then after that, you can run for US Senate, whatever it is. And so, but this program that I have, I've talked with people in other states. And what I say is, if you want this program, I'm happy to franchise this. And I will give this to you if you want to start this in your own state. I mostly focus on the Midwest, because that's what I know best. I've lived in the Midwest my whole life, and but it is there, and I'm happy to train the trainer, so we can have these programs pop up all over the country. And then on top of that, there are some candidate training programs that, for instance, Emily's List, that supports pro-choice Democratic women running for office. They have training programs. There's the National Democratic Training Committee that also offers some free training, and they do a beautiful job. They offer a lot of those online. So perhaps, Sylvia, you can offer some of those different websites to people listening to this. Sure. And I'm happy to have my communications person give you a few more of those as well. But I think it's helpful to get those out. But there are programs out there that will train you and get you ready to run for office. If I can share one quick story of our training program, it was one of our early ones. And there was a woman who made a decision that she was going to run for city council in Peoria, Illinois. And she had all kinds of people telling her, Rita, you shouldn't be running in that district in Peoria. She's a Black woman, and it was a predominantly white district. And she went through our training program, and my political director, he worked with her very, very closely her entire race, because we could see this potential in her. And so she runs, and it was the race of all the races that were going on throughout our congressional district on that date. That was the one I was watching probably the closest, because I was so excited about it. So we have the race. At the end of the night, she loses by one vote. Wow. And I can tell you, we were just absolutely heartbroken. But she handled her defeat with dignity, and also an important lesson in politics. But she handled her defeat with dignity. 2 years later, she makes a decision to run again for city council, but she ran at large, meaning throughout the whole city. And of all the candidates, she was the #1 vote getter and was elected at large. And then what happened after that? The next election cycle, she makes a decision to run for mayor. And so now in Peoria, Illinois, which is in our congressional district, she's the first woman ever to be elected mayor of that city. And she's the first person of color ever to be elected to mayor of that city. And so I share that story with you because this is something that we helped train her from day one. We stuck with her. You could see the potential in her, and she kept with it as well. And and today, she's made history. And I think her name is Rita Ali. And I think for Rita Ali, I think the the sky's the limit for her. She's talented. She's doing it all for the right reason. And, and I think that's a good story for anybody out there, just kind of to keep that in mind. She started from, a loss by one vote, kept with it. And today she's in this great position politically and governmentally.
And this brings me to my last question, which is that what would you recommend to someone listening to this podcast who is thinking about running for office?
If you're thinking about running for office, that means you've got an inkling that you're thinking this might be a possibility, and you at least have a little bit of interest if it's even in your mind. What I would say is do it. And because we need good people. And there are training programs out there. If you don't know anything about politics, if you don't know anything about running for office, and you can get in touch with me, you can get in touch with our office. And right now we're doing our Build the Bench virtually. And so there are some opportunities even to go through our program virtually. But there are programs out there. Ask people who are in office. I think, look, I believe in that saying about lifting other people up. I would never, ever be in this position as a member of Congress without the help of a lot of people. Every time I go to an event where I have supporters, I always say that this is a line of work that you can only be successful when you have the help of a lot of people. And that means like grassroots organizing, people who go out and knock doors for you, people who make contributions to you, those $27 contributions that you get to, and they add up and they help you get your messaging out. The people who are already in elected office who offer their endorsements or their support or bring their supporters on to help another candidate. So it's all of that. But I would say if you've got that inkling that you think you might want to run for office, do it. And then learn how you're going to be successful at it. Of our graduates of our Build the Bench program, we've about a third of our people who have gone through our training have run, and half of the people who have run have been successful. They've won their races. That's a 50% win rate. I think that's pretty darn good. And these are, for the most part, these are first-time candidates. And again, they're diverse, they're young, they're people who just want to make a difference. So I want to offer my encouragement more than anything else.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining us today, Congresswoman Bustos, and telling our listeners about your Build the Bench program and about your personal experience with campaigns and your work in the House. It has been really inspiring to hear from you. And really, I guess my final message to anyone listening as well is to just do it. If you are thinking about running for office, check out some of these training programs and just go for it. But thank you again, Congresswoman Bustos. This has been a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Sylvia. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.